To Gareth Porter. Can you talk about the documents that refer to Pakistan aiding the insurgency, the Pakistani ISI, the spy services, working with the forces in Afghanistan who are killing U.S. soldiers?
Yes, this is perhaps the closest thing to a major story that in terms of news value that comes out of the collection of documents that have just been leaked. And this is a story that is extremely important politically in terms of U.S. politics and U.S. policy because of the Obama administration's admission that it is vital that Pakistan assist the United States in preventing the Afghan Taliban from having the sort of safe havens in Pakistan that they've had in the past. Now, you know, what these documents are indicating is that there's lots of evidence that Pakistan's intelligence service, ISI, has indeed been meeting with the Taliban commanders. And although, you know, the American intelligence people were not there on the ground, nor Afghan intelligence people not there on the ground at those meetings, the supposition was obviously that what's going on here is that Pakistan's intelligence is working closely with the Taliban in terms of planning their strategy and indeed even specific operations. And this is an extremely damaging story in terms of the fragility of the U.S. war in Afghanistan at this very moment, which is at an advanced stage of basically suffering from political, being overwhelmed by political opposition or a lack of support. I would say that it's not too much to say that the Afghan war today is on political life support. It is really very, very close to the position of the Iraq War, George Bush's Iraq War in very late 2006, when Bush was forced to make some very fundamental decisions about what he was going to do about that war. And in that situation, I think the Obama administration is quite vulnerable to being attacked politically for having a policy that is so clearly unrealistic that it should be completely reassessed and start heading for the exits. In other words, the information, the new information about Pakistan, which simply reiterates and conforms to what we already know, essentially, about the Pakistani policy of cooperating closely with the Taliban, is a death warrant for any possibility of success of this war, and it should be the basis for new calls for U.S. exit strategy being put as a top priority right now. The Pakistani ambassador to Washington, Hussein Haqqani, vehemently denied claims the country's intelligence agency, ISI, has backed the Taliban. He said, "I think that the American leadership knows what Pakistan is doing. We have paid a price in treasure and blood over the past 2 years. More Pakistanis have been killed by terrorists, including our military officers and intelligence service." And, of course, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just promised Pakistan another $500 million in aid. Gareth. Well, what the ambassador is doing here, of course, is exactly what U.S. officials have done over the past year or so, which is to talk about the militants in Pakistan as though, you know, without differentiating between the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani neo-Taliban, to talk about the fact that, yes, the Pakistani government has made progress in dealing with the militants in Pakistan. Well, yes, they have. They've changed their policy significantly in terms of dealing with the Pakistani Taliban, but they have not changed their policy with regard to the Afghan Taliban. That's quite clear. And what you have, it's very interesting, the Obama administration just issued an 8-page paper yesterday which responds to this story. which is made up solely of public statements by U.S. officials over the past year and a half or so about this question of U.S. policy toward Pakistan and the Taliban. And what you find in these statements is utter unwillingness to specifically say right out loud that Pakistan is not only not cooperating with the United States on this issue, but there's no reason to believe that they're going to, because they don't believe it's in their interest to cooperate with the United States against the Taliban.
I wanted to go back to Stephen Gray in London, who spent the part of the weekend with Julian Assange, who's released these documents, the founder of WikiLeaks. In a minute, I want to ask you, Stephen, and also go to Dan Ellsberg, about how Julian Assange is being hounded as he travels the world. But first, the special forces, talk more about 373, Task Force 373.
Absolutely. It hasn't been much disclosed before. I did actually write about it in this book I wrote in a chapter called The Manhunt, because what I noticed is that this war is divided into the public version, if you like, the softer hearts and minds stuff. But if you look at the history of counterinsurgency, you'll know that actually counterinsurgency is not a soft option. And therefore, there is this unseen side of the war, which actually has become more and more dominant, which is basically the manhunt. You have these kill or capture units. They change their code names regularly, but Task Force 373 has been one of those units. And what they're doing is systematically going around and, well, they call it decapitation, removing the sort of the head of this organization that they call the Taliban, and thinking that that will destabilize the Taliban and win. Of course, you know, under the laws of war.
We just lost Stephen Gray, but we're going to go back to him in a minute. Let me ask the question to Rick Rowley about Task Force 373, about the whole issue of this Special Forces war.
Yeah, well, I think journalists like Jeremy Scahill and others have been tracking this for a while, that as the nation-building project fails in Afghanistan, and I mean, this year was supposed to be the year of nation-building. Marja was supposed to be the prelude to Kandahar. Both of those have been rebranded, canceled, completely dramatically changed. There's been a massive escalation of a second option, which is the Special Forces war, an entirely covert war. So, I mean, and you're seeing this publicly discussed now. This is the sign of the future. You know, there was the recent Newsweek on it. There's people publicly in the administration talking about this. When we abandon the nation-building project, which everyone recognizes is an abject failure, the new paradigm the war is going to take is drone strikes and special forces raids and midnight assassinations and capturing and abducting people. I mean, that this, if you look at the press releases every day, every week that NATO and ISAF put out, you can see that the majority of the kinetic action, as the military calls it, the majority of the people killed and captured are done by special forces. So there is no real information about them at all. It's all entirely secret. And these are just the ones that are made public. Many more of them aren't made public. These documents that were released, you know, they occasionally cover, in slant ways, cover special forces operations. But all of that stuff is a different level of classified. So, I mean, it's absolutely true that there are two parallel wars going on. There's the war for hearts and minds, which is increasingly just a distraction that the media have access to, where they have a very restricted rules of engagement, where they don't use as many airstrikes. And then there's a special forces war where it's you know, all systems go, where there aren't the same restrictions, where they routinely kill people who don't represent the same kind of, don't reach the same kind of threat level that they would have to in the conventional war. So I think this is going to be one of the most significant stories going forward into the future, is tracking through these documents how the evolution of this new kind of war there.
Stephen Gray, you were just getting into Task Force 373.
Yeah, I'm not sure quite where you lost me there, but I was just saying that there's a parallel war, and 373 is involved in what they call decapitation operations. They believe that the Taliban as an organization can be defeated by removing its head, and that getting rid of all these leaders will destabilize and help them to win. But it's actually a very conventional way of viewing things, and it goes completely counter to the idea of actually having a peace settlement. Because if you remove the leadership of an organization, you have no one to negotiate with, and you end up with a sort of constantly rejuvenated rebellion, which I think is what it is, of more and more extreme people. So it's very questionable whether this thing is actually productive at all, even in this very conventional way. I mean, I think what comes across overall is that the war is being fought in a very conventional way, despite what's being said. There's all this talk of it's always about how many enemy did we kill. It's all seen in a very sort of, as if it's kind of like a World War II situation. You really wonder whether the lessons have been learned. I also think that even the talk of Pakistan, I mean, I think it's an example of the US being played. I think there's a lot of paranoia there. They're being fed information by Afghan intelligence, where they get most of their intelligence from, and they see it as this great sanctuary. If only we, weren't. It's just like Vietnam. They say, if only we could cross the border, and defeat that sanctuary, somehow this would all go away. I don't think it's like that. I think it's a very complex problem, and I think a lot of it's to do with a straightforward rebellion and unpopularity of the Afghan government, which the US is supporting.
As I said, as we're